Welcome to the inspiring true story of Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, a pioneering activist, musician, and mother of the legendary Fela Kuti, who fought tirelessly for Nigerian independence and women's rights. Now, let's dive into the movie. The movie starts off when they raid her son's house and threw her from a two-story building just to punish and hurt her son, who has always been against the government. What they didn't know is that she was more of an activist than her son. This is Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, mother of Fela Ransome Kuti. Luckily enough, she survives the fall and tells her story to a reporter who comes to visit her in the hospital. She begins to tell her story of how her father was the son of a freed slave and how he encouraged her to be educated, unlike other men. At this time, education wasn't something common for females. While growing up, she was the first girl in her school since schooling was meant for only boys at that point, so she was often mocked. One day, she is approached by a group of boys who make fun of her and threaten to throw her into a well. Fortunately, a senior prefect of the school, whose name is Israel, he stops the boys from harassing her, rescuing her from their taunts. He then sends them away and goes on to introduce himself to Fumi. The duo became very good friends, but soon Israel left to study outside the country, but he still kept in touch with Fumi. Fumi also leaves to England to study a year before Israel came back to become a principal at their alma mater. Time passes by and the two later reunite and fall in love. While Israel became a reverend, she grew to become a teacher and activist. One day, she finds out that one of her pupils has stopped attending classes, so she decided to go see his mother at the market to know the reason why he stopped. While she was at the market with other women, the king's guard came to collect taxes from the women. They used force and scattered all their goods. Fumi stood up to them and fights back while other women sought to run. She slaps the face of one of the king's guard, surprising everyone at the scene. The shocked guard tries to hit back, but is stopped by one of his subordinates, reminding him of who she is. It turns out that since she is from one of the very few educated families in the town, she is quite popular and her family well respected. She decided to meet with the district colonial officer to discuss the plight of women, but he paid her no attention, driving her out of his office. Later, Fumi visits a friend of hers and found out that no one represented them in the king's court. She decides to set up a group of educated women who come together to teach the uneducated ones. But this didn't stop the king's guard from raiding the markets, as it only gets worse. Fumi later went on to suggest that the group be opened for all women from all walks of life. Some of the women disagreed as they felt irritated to be in the same group with market women. Fumi visits the market again and finds that the Parakois, the king's guard, had raided again, this time angrily. Some of the women, naive, blamed Fumi for making them victims of the king's anger. Fumi decides to go see the king herself to talk to him. At the palace, she is welcomed harshly by the king's parliament, all consisting of male and no female. The king also turns his back on her, not saying a word to her. Instead, a decision was made to increase the tax rate by 10% to bring more pain to the women. Fumi goes back angrily and disappointed. Days go by and the king's guard never stops raiding the market. Every day, more women decide to stop coming to the market due to the fear of the king's guard's attack. More fingers were pointed at Fumi as she began to assemble the women to march to the king's palace. She finally gathered the women and they staged a protest at the palace. Even at night, they slept there. Right outside the palace, singing and crying, protesting that their plight be heard and resolved, but the king turned deaf ears. Although some of his cabinet members showed concern as to the unhesitant women and their growing numbers. In a bid to scare the women and make them go back, he sent the Ogboni and Oro, a group that is forbidden for women to look at, but Funmi and the other women came prepared. They countered the appearance of the Ogboni and Oro with the appearance of naked mothers, which is also a taboo for men to see. The king remained adamant to the chaos outside his home until Mr. Winterbottom, a representative of the colonial officer, came to tell the king that something must be done to curb the unrest. He, alongside the king's cabinet's request for Funmi, and reveals to her that he would remove the 10% tax rate placed on the market women. But Funmi and the other women refused, insisting that all their demands and not just one of their demands be met. She walks out of the king's presence, leaving the whole cabinet surprised. Mr. Winterbottom, irritated by the women's agitation, orders the king's guard to attack the women, flogging and capturing them. The women fled in numbers, but not all could get away. Some of them, including Funmi, got caught and jailed. After some days, the women were released and Funmi was scared to go back to the fight or lead the women again. But with the support from her husband Israel and some of the women, they headed back to King's Palace. This time, they grew in number and force. The king's cabinet, surprised to see the number of women outside the palace and the force at which they came back, asked where they all had come from. They were told that women from beyond Egba town had joined the protest. They insisted that the king be moved out of the palace and taken to a safer place in Oshogbo. But the king refuses to heed to this advice, insisting he couldn't run away from his palace because of women. Meanwhile, the women kept on protesting till they made their way into the palace, breaching the palace defense and heading for the king's throne. On the other hand, the king, shocked at the women's audacity and overtaking power, resolved to flee from his palace with his family and cabinet members. He ended up leaving his staff, a symbol of his authority, as he escaped. Funmi sees this and seizes the staff, flaunting her conquest. The king that terrorized and belittled the women was no more. The whole town celebrated this defeat, and the news of how Funmilayo Ransome Kuti subdued the Alake of Egba land spread far and wide. Thank you for watching. Let us know other women who stood against the dictatorship of men in the comment section, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe so you don't get to miss out on the next movie recap on this channel. Bye.